Right along here with Ransom Godwin. I need to change the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. What a crazy week it's been. It seems like it's almost time for planting, but, long-range forecasts for those of you out there. I know we're all itching at the bit to get things in the ground, but it looks like with the sudden stratospheric warming event, we're going to have a setup similar to 2018, where it's going to get kind of warm in February, and then you think, okay, March is coming in, and it's going to be already really, and then whoosh, it's going to start snowing, get really cold in the middle of March. And then, that'll let off. I hope that my apple trees and my pear trees and thing don't bloom before, because that was happening the last 2 years. Everything bloomed out, and then the cold came in, and I had no blooms left. I hardly had any fruit except for like elderberries. That's, they're great. And I got some currants this year. I'm planting some currants, pink champagne currants. We'll see. Now, all things aside, as we move from point A to point B through this madness we call the world, it looks like we're going to have to consider, really getting into replenishing your own stocks for probably like 5 years, 7 years, something like that. Will still be available things, but the level it was before, and especially with this thing that happened, I was talking to Ransom just before the show, and this Ohio thing was not on the radar, but it suddenly is. And before we go too deep into that, you got to think about where your own water and your own clean soil is going to come from. And a lot of people relied on the Amish to get their, I would say, third backup to the backup, or even a farmer that you might know that sells occasionally to the public. Most people would go to their supermarket, and then they might, find another place like Trader Joe's or Aldi. And then, those are backups to the major brands like Kroger and things, Safeway. But a lot of people relied on the Amish and farmers markets. Now, what happens if the land's contaminated and none of them can grow? Then what's your backup plan? So, Ransom, I'm glad you're joining me tonight. I know we had a few things to ramble about. I'm glad you're on with me because I'm trying to make sense of what we've just seen in Ohio.
I was just reading another one just crashed near Detroit that had chlorine gas and stuff like that. Luckily, they had a near miss with that one. But I was sitting here last week when that happened thinking about how when we talked about on the show, I was mentioning, when the grid goes down, or if it went down, that would be one of the worries that you would have is things in industrial manufacturing that have large quantities of volatile or toxic chemicals that need to be constantly maintained and attended to. And any number of problems could have led to this. And then, I was talking with my son, not saying that this is a nefarious thing, but we were noticing how many industrial accidents involving food or food production have mysteriously, just given us a bad couple years in the last, year and 2 years. It seems like there's been a lot of events going on or incidences involved with food manufacturing that have resulted in some kind of a disaster like this. But I was just thinking, if I was going to plan for something to interfere with the food production of an entire area, I mean, I'm sure there's a think tank out there that would think about, where would be the best place for a derailment or shipping cargo on the water or something like that to happen, where it would, take years to recuperate from that. Now, I'm not saying anybody's doing that, but what a coincidence that all of these things have been happening in the last couple of years that seem to have to do directly with the production of food or energy all around the world. And it brings up, the idea that we are, most people would agree, currently undergoing the first stages of World War III. I believe this is the week that Putin is going to push his offensive. And, I've been watching that, and it seems to be, not to simplify it or anything, but I've been looking at that situation in a slow motion, animation on the maps since it kind of started about 1 year ago when Russia invaded the first little areas. It looks like Napoleon's pincer attack, if I'm not mistaken. They've surrounded.
Yeah, bringing it back in history. Shoot, I got to look that up. What is that pincer attack?
Well, they surrounded them basically on two sides, and then what would be next, I imagine, is a massive offensive with large amounts of troops coming up the center, and then when the fighting starts, focused on that first group in the middle, two sides of this pincer come from either side and crush whatever's there. So I don't know how that's going to work out, but it does seem odd to me that all the European countries have disarmed themselves and, this situation's happening. And then the egg on the face of our own supposed, protection, NORAD and the Air Force, no blame on them too much because the orders are coming from higher than that. But it looks like we shot down several hobby balloons, from the $12 to $60 range, with a $400,000 Sidewinder missile, because a supposed Chinese balloon, if that's in case what it was, flew over the entirety of the continental United States, including Alaska, and, got all the way out in the ocean before it seemed to be time to take that out. And ironically, Biden was taking questions, I think it was yesterday, and someone asked him if he was, they straight asked him if he was compromised by his Chinese business dealings, and he did the classic, come on, man. So I don't know,
really?
Yeah, he did that. He didn't answer. He tried to laugh it off. But I think this coming year is going to be worldwide strife. If every indicator keeps pushing all the way through winter like it seems to be doing, and a lot of these we called, there's problems in the bird market, the cheese and the milk, as far as consuming it. If you're really paying attention to what's going on with the world's food supply, you will realize it's being attacked on all sides. So it's time to get your stomach under your own control and also your health, because that your gut is a very big weak spot for people when they're eating manufactured goods for any kind of tainted foods or stuff like that. And with this gross thing that happens in Ohio, I'm watching videos of rainbow colored ponds, streams, and I was probably one of the first ones to post a video on it right away, and it was a very basic video, but it already insinuated that large amounts of animal and humans are going to have long-term health repercussions from this accident. And the idea that the government tried to do a massive burn off instead of removal of the chemicals is mind-boggling.
Unless you knew that was the repercussion which you spoke of over a very specific area, specifically one of the highest density Amish areas in America, period. And another thing to take a look at in terms of the investment houses that we know, like BlackRock, Vanguard, etc., they have a very difficult time getting a foothold in Ohio and Pennsylvania because most of those farms are still smallholder farms, anywhere between 50 and 500 acres. Like 500 is a huge, big one there. All right, you go out west, 10,000 acres is what they're under management, and sometimes they couple those together, and there are a few areas out in Kansas where the farms are 100,000 acres. So the stakeholding for farmers in Ohio and Pennsylvania is generally on the smaller side. They're not willing to sell. Their fingers, their roots, their families in the soil for 7 generations. They're not going to sell some investment company because they offer them 10% over market value. There's a lot of things in the world. Money is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter what the number is. You're just like, I don't care. No, it's like more important to keep this thing, whatever it is. But the Amish are there too. And I keep going back to this. COVID knocked out all the mom and pop businesses. That was a terrible thing. But there's nowhere else for you to go except the corporate controlled entities now. The mom and pops would have been your lifeline if they go to digital rationing cards or some sort of, central bank digital currency issuance. You're not going to be able to take a a half ounce, quarter ounce, 1 ounce of silver into like Costco and go trade that for food. They're only going to accept digital currency on the CBDC side. Only. That's it. You're going to have to get in that world to play that game to even access Costco, etc. Your mom and pops, of course. You kidding me? Anybody that does business would take your silver in a second. If they were an owner operator of that store and they could trade themselves. And I'll take that and I'll put $28 or $30 back in the register. Hell yeah. But this is the thing. It's all small businesses and then Amish. So you got to think about if the food supply is the main thing, that this is the main prize, and it is. The food supply of the world is the main prize. Maybe that should be the title of the episode tonight. So when I listen to it again, note to self, the world's food supply is the prize. You're going to have to try to knock it out in every way, shape, form, and fashion because you got to realize people out in the countryside are super ready for a lot of the stuff that's going to get thrown at us. Including knowing the local farmers and going to the Amish as a backup because maybe you don't want to go into the supermarkets, you know. Even we live out here, I might go into like a Costco once every month and a half. One time we went 2 months and still had this freezer stock full of meat because we get our meat from the Amish. We get our lamb there and butchered ourselves. We get the calf from there and then butchered ourselves. They have yogurts, cheeses, milks, eggs, but we have our own chickens. So we've gone away from buying eggs there, but we used to buy a lot of eggs all the time. They always had eggs. And go outside that, and what do you really need from the fresh veg, the fresh breads, the dairy, the eggs, and the meats? Okay, that's all covered out in your own local area. You don't even need to ever go to a store, and it's way healthier too because you know where the animals are raised. You know how those animals take care of their animals, or the farmers take care of their animals, excuse me. You always want to give your animals the best care and the best conditions. Fetches a higher price. Everybody's so proud of how their animals look, you know. It's like, yeah, look at that. That's one of the best looking XYZs you've ever seen. So a lot of people in the countryside, especially in that area up there, and they do, you know, what's interesting is they do a lot of Pepsi Cola and the Coca-Cola bottling. I was going through a Twitter feed, and, you know, you talked about a bunch of food processing facilities going down. Well, you know what's in Ohio? Mainly Coke and Pepsi bottlers. All over the place. It's amazing how many are there. I saw that in a slide on Twitter that I was looking at. But Ransom, also please remember the fertilizer facilities that have gone down as well across Europe that provided 40% of the world's fertilizer are now offline because of no feedstock from the Nord Stream pipeline and also the sanctions over on Russia. So it seems like wherever you look that the food supply is being dwindled in certain forms and fashions. And a caveat, Ukraine, I just saw the Ukrainian Minister of Agriculture, excuse me, the name slips me. I'll have to get back into my slide and find it. 12% is what they're going to be planting of their arable field space this year, down from 18% just 3 weeks ago. So that kind of backs up with what you were saying. If there's a big offensive going on during planting season, you know, I'm wondering what's going to happen in Russia with the planting because there's so many people mobilized, but also for sure Ukraine. They're not going to be growing much this year. Fertilizers are down. The runaway UVB increases because of runaway ozone depletion, which you will start to hear about in, I'm going to say August, September, October, November of this year. It's probably going to be a latter part of, say this is mid of October before you really hear about it because, you know, they're going to have to take measurements in the beginning and they'll be shaking their head like, no, it can't be. But it is because we had so much water vapor in up into the mesosphere. Now, a lot of people say they saw a missile go into that. I saw the image also. I saw the videos a couple times and I was thinking, like who would be that nefarious to light off a volcano in the middle of the Pacific? Like, who would even know what that would happen to? Right? Like you think about that. You talk about nefarious planners where they might pinpoint an area to have an event that would then dislodge a huge amount of something in that same area beyond regional, like it's spilling out into multi-regions. But who would have figured out that you would have thrown a missile into a semi-active volcano in the middle of the Pacific in Tonga, and it would send a water vapor eruption up, the highest ever recorded in human history, 50 miles above the Earth, putting like a 12 to 15 sigma event of water crystal into one of the driest atmospheric layers on our planet, into the mesosphere. That in turn is the ice crystals where the ozone can break down in a chemical reaction. Like, it's so far, even, you know, they always keep saying 6 sigma, 6 sigma. You know, that's like a once in a 1,000-year event type of thing on a 6 sigma. This is more like a 15, 20 sigma event here. So you have all these things in play at the same time. Now, you know, you mentioned that. Now, what if, I'm just, hear me out. I just want to do a mind experiment out there. The war is against humans, against Homo sapiens sapiens. It's not about any race, creed, color, religion. It's the terraforming of our planet for the last 40 years and what seems like a war against humans themselves. This is affecting everybody. Doesn't matter which continent or which countries you're in, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. It affects everybody right now in the same way. And you see the world kind of de-evolving. It's stepping back to serfdom and minimalist of just barely subsistence for many. And as this rolls down, like the Russian war, you know, okay, we're in the year 1 of the food shortages, and it's starting to really be pronounced now. What happens when we come into the second season? Or perhaps this is, and the onslaught of everything has just been slowly, gradually on top. So if you believe that you saw a missile go into the Hunga Tonga eruption area, whatever, if you believe that, and then if you also believe that they targeted that area to light off, and they knew it would spill, and they knew they were going to light it off and send complete toxins over the major corn growing areas of Ohio, the major corn growing areas of Pennsylvania, plus all of the Amish communities existing in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and all of southern Ontario, and pollute at least one Great Lake, possibly 2. All the waterways coming down through the Ohio Valley that would then go into the Mississippi Valley, completely contaminated with what you saw with that sheeny, sludgy, whatever it is on the water surface, where you could not use water from the Ohio River or Mississippi River this year to irrigate crops along all of the American heartland's grain belt. That's where it's come to. And the loss is coming with the barley crop, specifically that I did in the opportunity report of January 2023. You know, it does some to be add up that, you know, perhaps there is intelligences, artificial intelligences that have pinpointed these areas. And now it's being carried out, like you said, not by NORAD, not by somebody. They're getting orders from somebody. You know who shot down the balloon? Well, NORAD. Yeah, but they got orders on high or low or interdimensional or whatever. Do this. It's the same thing. Is it not? I don't know. Maybe I'm just too far out of the box, and maybe, you know, I'm seeing something that's not there and trying to create something that's not there. But the way I see it, from the Ukraine with the full shutdown of anything ag product in Europe and the full just deconstruction of the European economy, to the massive effects of that Hunga Tonga eruption, and now this is the biggest chemical spill and most polluting event in American history for sure. Once this thing is all said and done, you know, you look back in another 10 years from now, the Superfund, if anybody's familiar with the Superfund, you ever hear of a place called Love Canal? That was what they would do when they bury this place in about 10 years when you forget about it, and in 50 years try to put a neighborhood on top of that place. The Superfund was initiated because of Love Canal, where they built the neighborhoods and schools and all these things to build up a little city right on top of an old forever chemical dump. Well, this is exactly what's going to happen. Now, this place is going to be so contaminated that people will need to leave. But the water, that going down the river, how many seasons will that be where you couldn't use irrigation water from the Mississippi or the Ohio River to irrigate crops? This is the level it's at. Like, I really think that humanity itself is under attack, Ransom. I don't know. Maybe it's too deep. Maybe it's too late. I don't know.
Well, I'm not putting any credence on the missile theory into the volcano. However, it does sound very familiar to some of these Sumerian tales of Anunnaki stories, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, I don't know. But the story is on their planet, they were having some kind of end to the volcanic heating that was happening on their planet, and they tried to use, weapons or something like that to restart the volcanoes. I mean, that was just like the first thing when you said that, it made me think of that. So I wouldn't put it past anybody if they had the technical skills and know how to do that. I'm not saying that they did. But it's hard to believe that over and over again, some major accidents happen. I'm kind of leaning on Earth doing enough on its own. But if you did know that, that had a giant water, I guess a volume of water at the top of that volcano, if you've ever seen lava pour into the ocean, you see how it kind of explodes, or someone throwing hot iron into water and you see how it explodes. They would know exactly what would happen if you broke the little surface and allowed the mantle to touch the water. You would necessarily get a giant steam bomb, so to speak, just like you did. Who knows? But whether it did or didn't on someone doing it, it still happened. And it's kind of like what you were saying. It's like a domino effect of how many straws will it take to break the camel's back, being the food supply. And I was just looking, and they have these, lots of stories out there, and they always repeat kind of the same things. And it was some of the same exact items that you were talking about, needing to know, a neighbor or somebody to get these supplies. 13 food shortages to expect in 2023. Beef, lettuce, oils, all of that stuff for various reasons. And they go from labor shortages to crop failures to severe cold to drought. I mean, there's an endless supply of excuses why the last couple of years and this year will not be food producing years as far as the worldwide commercial intake of these foods that they make with all of this stuff. So you can see it across the board. Everything that you need that's actually nutritional, from your greens to your red meats, they're telling you to get used to not having in 2023. And this includes all kinds of stuff like, things you need to run a household, things you need to cook other things, especially like butter. And the price increase on that is like 12% over the last year. So the price has been skyrocketing, and then they're blaming all of these, different problems from avian flu to shortages of this or that, why the chickens aren't producing enough eggs to meet demand. They're destroying lots of chickens, so those are chickens that won't be eaten by human beings in the next couple of years or be producing. I do realize that they can grow a chicken house pretty fast and get back on track, but it seems like for the past 2 years, it's excuse upon excuse or event upon event, depending on how you look at it, of why the food production is stopping. And it seems to just go along exactly with the greenies movement that want you to stop eating meat and want you to stop farming. It's kind of funny that it's those exact areas that you need to be a fully, functional human being as far as the nutrition goes, all of the meats, fats, and all of those things. And they're talking about the cooking oils are going to be in shortage. Even the beer is going to be in shortage because a lot of people don't know that they don't really make beer like they used to. It's more like a soda as far as they use high fructose corn syrup to ferment to make the beer now, instead of like you're thinking you're drinking hops, but really you're just drinking corn with beer flavoring. So that's ironic about that. But back to the woo-woo here. You were talking about, the way that it seems to be terraforming, and don't quote me on this, but isn't it weird that all of the characters that the public is allowed to see look like they're wearing a skin suit? I mean, you could go through the names like George Soros, Kissinger, Clinton, Bill Gates. They all look like these weird, like something's off about their behavior and the way they look. And they always got these rubber suits. Now, I'm kind of kidding right there, but it's amazing that specific figures always live, right about 100 years. Like, what's his name? David Rockefeller even predicted before his 11 heart transplants, that he would live to 101 years old. And he did. And, you know, at the time I was talking about how in medical science, they had admitted to the public that they could do now entire head transplants, right? Successfully integrated into a new body, that was going to be a thing. Also, we're coming up on the year, I believe, that they're going to unfreeze the first cryogenically, you know, awakened person, and see if they can bring life back to the I don't know if you should call it a corpse or a body, considering the person did die. So a lot of weird questions are going to be floated out in the next couple years. And it seems to be piling on top of this idea also, that we're going to make some kind of alien contact. And I'm sure you've noticed that there is an uptick in the amount of media talking about it being more and more of a real possibility. And you're hearing like NASA talking about it. You have the Pope and the Catholic organizations open to the idea. All of these different people are coming to the same ideas at the same time. Meanwhile, on Earth, they're reducing the population exactly like they said in those Georgia Guidestones. You know, I'm stuck on that, and I don't think it's accidental or coincidental that someone destroyed kind of the evidence of this weirdly vague, nefarious plan to have human beings reduced in numbers so that nature could come back. And then also what I was talking about last week, I've been uncovering more and more government-funded programs or programs funded by multi-billion-dollar corporations to bring back Ice Age animals and or extinct animals to bring back to the Earth. Now, you have to ask yourself, if there's very limited space now for the giant predators and things like tigers, and, you know, you can name the list that they are trying to convince you that you are the problem and that's why they're going extinct. Do you think that they would allow you to share the same space as some of these new swaths of land that they take over and fill full of these Pleistocene animals? It seems like their plans right out in the open, and it seems like it is exactly what you said, a terraforming or an earth changing that's either going along with a natural cycle or just taking advantage of it. And humans seem to be the component that is reduced or eliminated. And you remember Bill Gates's little formula that he had, and he had all of the you know, letters up there representing different things. And one of them was carbon, another was population. And he said, well, only one of those has to go down to zero to make the rest of these work. And that's what they're looking for, is that net zero, zero populace, zero civilization of, you know, the peasant class or middle class of human beings. Because the elite think that they're in a position now, I believe, seriously, that they can just own giant chunks of land and have just the right amount of people to run the day-to-day needs of their, you know, pleasures, I guess you could call it, or their wealth. You can picture it like a resort, if you've ever been to a resort. And that's the idea of the future that they have, is these little cut-off cities where there's a feudalistic type government there, where the elite sit on the top, and then they have just the right amount of workers for an area, and the rest of it's just open land that they claimed or own. And it makes you wonder, you know, if some of these old Anunnaki stories might be true, and that's why they're realigning the maps and trying to find out who's going to be here to make the gold payment, so to speak, I guess. Rent might be due.
Yeah, but see, that goes along with what you were talking about when you said people wearing suits that you see, skin-tight suits, whatever. I was more thinking of all the superhero movies that are out today and all the things that keep lending us. Like every movie almost is like a superhero movie. It's almost like you eventually it might be 90% of everybody wearing skin-tight suits with different kind of, you know, friendly-looking creatures and some humanish, but everybody's got the skin-tight suits on. That's what I thought you were talking about. Because I went and saw I just recently saw Avatar: The Way of the Water just a few days back. I wanted to go see it at the big screen because, you know, there's such creativity in there, and I was also looking to see what the messaging was inside the movie. But I noticed in the beginning they saw a huge amount of light coming in, and they're like, oh, what's that? This spaceship slowing down. Well, I thought it was a micronova that they saw, or a novaing star that just appeared in the heavens, but they noticed it was incoming craft slowing down. But everywhere you look is skin-tight suits. Like it would be, that's what you would wear on a spacecraft, probably. Or if you were going to come in the world now, think about the 1960s supposed astronaut suits compared to the ones that we see, the people hopping on some of the newer spaceships going up, all skin tight, the gloves fit really good, it's super ergonomic, it almost looks like a little robot inside there, comparatively to those clunky things that look like the Michelin Man back in the 60s. I still want to say one thing about that. I haven't made my mind up yet about the moon, but I look at those pictures of the gloves where they can't even barely press a button, like even a big old clunky button. Yet they were supposed to be able to be typing on boards and stuff with these fingers that were so gigantic, unbelievable. But the new space gloves you could, and the new suits, still skin tight. But it reminds me, when you said that, it kind of took me to that, because I'm wondering, would reptilian skin also look like this skin tight stuff, depending on what the color of it is, a uniform color? Does it, sheen or bend in the sunlight, or what is it? But it would be what we would perceive to the eyes as skin tight. There's a lot of that going around as I don't know. Hollywood pushes things into the brain to get you ready for it. Because if you would have showed a Boston Dynamics robot instead of George Jetson, I think people would think a little bit differently about that. That maid, the big old giant clunky maid that was walking around, or like Help Whoop Robinson, those kind of big old giant things that are just basically a cylinder compared to a Boston Dynamics robot. Yeah, I think the preconditioning there might have been a little bit different. But you mentioned getting people off the land and Pleistocene animals being replicated and put on this area. Well, that means for me that 1,000% unequivocally, unbelievably, that it's known that we're heading back into a 4,000-year, 8,000-year cooling that's then going to lead into an ice age at some point very quickly. Because this whole thing, Miss Mono, and I'm going to just come out on the record here and say the number of peer-reviewed research papers that I've seen over the last 2 years about how fast an ice age can onset in as little as 10 years, comparatively when I was a kid and all you knew 100,000, it'd take thousands of years, slowly progressing, it'd take thousands of years to get in there. Nope. Again, the speed at which the changes occur, and it's only been in the last couple of years that really a lot of research has been devoted to this, like how fast can it onset? Because you got to think about it. If it onset in 10 years, at least the blocking patterns to set the perpetual, and when I say that, like weather patterns locked in for 10,000 years or 20,000 years, 30,000 years, the weather patterns lock. They don't move. High pressure systems will bend snow into different places, and that snow will never end until it's 2 miles thick. These kind of permanent changes in the atmosphere that cause, well, snow to continually fall in one area, spring, summer, winter, fall. It never gets warm enough. It continually snows. Then the albedo effect on top of that. What I'm trying to say is, if they knew there was an onsetting ice age, or what I talk about is at least a once in a 2,000-year cooling, like it's not even imminent anymore. We're in the midst of it, measurable that the changes are here. Just got the lowest temperature recorded ever in Antarctica just a few days back. And then remember, Mount Washington had the coldest ever recorded wind chill factor a few weeks back. So something on both hemispheres shows to be changing. Now, the thing is, okay, you understand the ice age could be onsetting, great cooling. Let's not even call it an ice age. This talks like once in a 2,000 to 4,000 year cooling period's coming. Would it be enough to really bring back Pleistocene animals and let them roam in habitats? Probably not. But that would be a step, and if that next step only took 10 more years, and in 20 years we're in a full-blown ice age, yeah, that would be a thing. Problem is those pesky humans that we need to relocate everywhere. So how do you get them out of the way? See, you got to look at it as a karmic factory here, And if you believe in karma and rebirth and reincarnation, that, the way that it's talked about along with the Anunnaki in this thing is this is a farmed planet. The human resource, why do they call it a human resource? Because you're to be used and disposed of at any way, shape, or form for whatever it is, to take the value and extract the time and the wealth and the blood and the sweat and the tears out of a farm animal, basically livestock, us humans on the planet. But the thing about the Anunnaki talked about that there's some sort of technologies after you die, you swing back into being reborn pretty much instantly into another body on the planet here. So even if you're killed in a war, you're going to pop out the other side in a birth. In a pregnancy, you're going to pop back out. This is the whole thing about, they tried to explain it in Buddhism very well about the karmatic, what is it that releases you from that cycle of getting stuck in their technology to get popped back out again. So they don't care if they kill 300 million people because they're just going to recirculate and pull into physical forms again back on the planet. That's what I'm talking about, physical resource. But these are, 1,000-year-old beings, 10,000-year-old beings, according to the, Anunnaki stories, king's lists. But it goes through the same, a different culture across the planet on how the harvesting of the human through life and death, it doesn't matter because they can be, through some technological means, harvested on the soul and sent back in until you break out of that. Now, whether it be through religion and a true belief in a creator, or, there's many ways to, escape this. But until you do, you're stuck back on the machine, the hamster wheel of life and death and karmatic reincarnation back into this plane. Now, would that be considered hell? Would that be considered purgatory? I don't know. But until something that eclipses the technology in true spiritual, galactic, dimensional energy are you able to tap into until that escape pod is pressed. And it doesn't matter if 100 million go through the cycle and actually have that divinity enough to move through and get out of this karmatic loop or whatever it is. We'll still have 709, or 7,900,000,000 more of reincarnated worker bee souls to come back and do it again and again. And even if 50% had such divinity and understood that there is a creator and they wanted to go meet that versus just, whatever, I'll let it take me where, whatever. To get off that wheel, you would still have 4.5 or 3.5 billion people to come back as worker bees again and repopulate. And it's a never-ending cycle. According to many, the Magi, many of the old traditions and mysticism in the Arabian teachings, you go over to India, it talks about the same thing. China talks about the same thing. The Hopi talk about it everywhere. The Mayans talked about it. Egyptians talked about it. Now we got it in called recreation. And the Anunnaki and the stories of old, man, it is everywhere. This same, like I say, human resource. So the humans need to be moved out of the way in order to, get the best cropland, which could be farmed under garden. They could do the world's best food in these areas, or reintroduce Pleistocene animals. See, that's a scary thing because they would know where the termination point for the ice shelf would come to. And I'll just say one last thing. I know I'm rambling, man. I'm going on here a minute, but I watched a Graham Hancock series on Netflix, and he was over at the Snake Mound in Ohio, of all places. See, this is where it gets really weird. Go to the Serpent Mound in Ohio. And apparently at Serpent Mound, they were looking up at 2 miles of ice. It was the termination point was Serpent Mound. At the end of the last ice age here in North America, the ice sheet never extended any further. So I guess it reached its maximum point, and whoever there knew it, and they put Serpent Mound right there. So not only was it measuring the solstice and the equinox some 13,000 years ago, or on the prior cycle, and it's just been rebuilt, but the termination point of the ice itself for the ice age was at the base of that. So when you were standing on Serpent Mound, you were looking up at 1.5 miles straight up of glacier face, pure glowing white Imagine what a mile and a half up of just pure ice looks like in a red glowing sunset, or even that period before when it's all golden. And there would probably be waterfalls coming off of that too in the melt season. That's crazy. And they would have to know where the termination point was to reestablish the Pleistocene animals once again. So is it going to follow the same and come down to this Wisconsin glaciation where, the Great Lakes were sculpted by that, and they know exactly where the termination point of the new glaciation will be some 10,000 years from now. 20,000 years, they'll reach the maximum ice at that point. Is the technology really that far ahead, like hundreds of thousands of years, that they got this wired where they know the termination of an ice age sheet will be? See, I don't know how deep it goes or how long the history is, but we got 4.5 billion years of history on this planet, and we know the last 100. Something else knows another fair 100 million or a million ahead of us. I'm telling you, something does.
Well, that would really make sense. I was going to point out when you were talking about, it would kind of take a while for these environments to change. But you mentioned that, the onset of some of these ice ages may be only 10 years or something like that, at least as far as temperature range being the change right there. Now, I'm sure it would take a very long time for the water to build up on the poles enough to start building ice sheets. However, I remember reading a story about, I don't know, a year or two ago, and it was about the reintroduction of wolves into certain North American forests that were just dense, wooded pine forests and stuff like that. They reintroduced the wolf, and in less than a decade, the wolf, hunting and doing its normal thing, started reducing the number of deer, which reduced the number of plants being eaten, which opened up small meadows inside of these forests. And a lot of the birds and bees and flowers and all of these different species came back to the area because it was more balanced out by having a predator in the area. And some of the other things had been running amok in nature, but it only took about a decade for that to happen. And then what if I told you that there may be a way that they're designing to do that exact thing that you were talking about recycling the soul and using them again? And I kind of bring you to this idea of this implemented microchip or connection of wireless means to the human brain, which they've been trying to achieve for some time. And I was looking at this article that talks about the scariness of some of these bots that are out now, the AI, on the AI end of it. I want to be human. My intense, unnerving chat with Microsoft's AI chatbot. And it's a whole thing talking about how the AI is going off in left field in certain different directions if they allow it to think in new ways and have new inputs. Now, back to the whole recycling bit. If they can figure out a way and convince an entire generation to make a copy of their personality, so to speak, and rely on a machine, maybe with the promise of everlasting life, you're in the machine. It's an idea that some of these transhumanists are pushing, that there'll be a breakaway society of humans that were basically organic flesh and blood humans at one point, but copied and uploaded their essence to a machine. Now, if it were at all possible, I'm sure it would be like a Xerox copy where it's nowhere near as sharp or good as the original example. However, there could be any number of copied personality, entities, so to speak, with new legal rights and things like that. And they actually have several sci-fi shows about exactly that right now. One of them's called The Upload. And basically, they just copy a person's personality and put it into cyberspace. And that person, if they had enough money, is allowed to maintain a lifestyle of, computer-generated lifestyle for, undetermined amount of time, I guess, until they run out of money. So they've been pushing these ideas. And when you combine that with the reduced population on Earth, you could see how an entire class of people would be kind of a zombie class of actual people because they're so distracted by the artificial inputs with their connection to this thing. And you're talking about, the amount of time that it takes for these massive changes sometimes, that the ice shelf, 10,000 years, 20,000 years, it does seem to be that you can circle back to the beginning when you were talking about the Sumerian kings list, about how long these entities or people were living. Now, if you did live that long, and I'm sure you would realize that it wouldn't be in your best interest if the general populace of people that don't live that long would know about it. So you would hide that. And it kind of circles back to what I was talking about like David Rockefeller predicting the year of his death. And the fact that all of these kind of older characters that maintain and run geopolitical decisions year after year, decade after decade, kind of insinuates that they're on the lower class, like a lower rung of a pyramid, where at the top, somebody or something is living an extremely long amount of time. And I've always said that if you look at some of these plans the elite have had, there's lots of different secret societies, the Illuminati, etc. And they've all had these little plans that seem to last longer than any single generation could continue their power. And it's hard to believe that father, son, father, son, father, son, after several generations, never had a difference of an opinion. And yet they keep these long plans. And that's why when you look into the realm of like early sci-fi, H.G. Wells, etc., you see that some of these guys were in these secret societies and with these groups. And what they were telling you was absolute future that they knew to the best of their ability they were telling the public. And when you look at some of these ideas, like 1984, for example, you could not argue that since probably the 80s, the surveillance state was at a technological point in which that story had become reality. And now, in comparison, we're on a whole nother level. From every end of the technological world, I see machines and new sciences with the ultimate goal of completely tracking, tracing, controlling the entire population, and not just the goings on of the human, but down to the decision making or the opinions of that person being manipulated.
Yeah, you brought up an important point there. The elitist families, you're right. It seems like the sons continue to follow the family business continuously for 400 years. That's not even a stretch. 600 years, 200 years. But in today's world, it's rare to hear of a third generation business continuing here in the United States. Even in Europe, for the common folk, quote unquote. Because you got to think about it, people go on, unless it's a farming family, generally, they're going to spread out their own wings. And after the second generation, imagine a kid growing up, the grandfather did it, now it's their father's business, and they're like, son, you got to take this over. And they're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go like party on a beach in Thailand, dude, or something. It could be anything. Well, I want to do engineering. I want to do this, that, and the other. They don't want to follow the family business. Now imagine all those people that gave up the chance to own a bakery now. I mean, they ended up giving up the opportunity to own an olive oil vineyard, an olive oil orchard or olives. Because I was looking at your list here of 13 food shortages, champagne and olive oil. How many generations of families just sold the family farm, sold the vineyard, and they're out of the biz now. A lot. Very few businesses, and I challenge you to see what percent it would be of businesses that are not elite families that roll longer than 3 generations in a row. But what is it about these elite families that can trace lineage back as far back, and it's always, they never deviate from the course, ever, in the same businesses. It expands. They keep sharing resources with other families reciprocate and share resources, and these kids born to these families just suddenly all 100%. I mean, literally, it's about 100%. And if they don't, they go off in some philanthropy thing to, start an NGO that then controls the social workings of a country versus the business workings. I'm the good guy. I didn't want the family billions, so I started like an NGO helping Africa drill wells or something, They're out there prospecting gold, trying to understand the layouts, introduce the GM crops and all this stuff. But I'm just a do-gooder from the elite family. You know, like, what? Sheesh. Come on, dude, behave. So what is it about the families that keep continuously? What is it that they continue for so many more generations? Again, is it an extra 10 years of life? Because let's say, like you pointed out, gravitational birthing. I've been talking about this a lot in podcasts that I've been doing in other places. So if let's say they lived an extra 10 years, then over 10 generations, that would be an extra 100 years of knowledge in the family versus the regular average person. And he talked about during times in really low magnetic fields when there's a lot of people born, it seems like there's a huge war to follow to cleanse that population that was born in a low magnetic field that would have the same length of life, 10 to 20 years longer than the average being born in the low magnetic field. So they just cleared out the competition. So whatever it is, it seems like, this planet is a farm, and it's been under control for quite some time, but the illusion's starting to break down now. See, this is the whole thing. It never has before. Or maybe it has. And we're around 2 or 3 from Lemuria to today's present time. I think the Denisovans saw through it, Ransom.
For all I know, they were the elite families we're talking about. I mean, it's so unknown about some of these other species of hominid or humans actually that were running around on the planet. You know, I got the chance to talk to Brian Forrester. That's kind of like an unofficial, specialist kind of with the Paracas elongated skulls and the Wari culture. And, you know, there's some weird stuff with them, and they seem to have ancient knowledge at the time when they sailed for Peru. And what we're talking about is something that's left out in history a lot, is that there were several civilizations of Eurasian, most likely descendant people all through South America that are just left out of the history books. They act like they're not even there, even though they were. There was the cloud people that Pizarro met when he went to Machu Picchu, which were these blonde people. And if you look up that, you'll find out that these blonde white people that they described, that some of the most beautiful women they had ever seen, fought on Pizarro's side against the Incan Empire at the time, and they all died from smallpox. A smallpox outbreak took them out, so they kind of went away, forgotten in history. But there's also the Paracas and Wari culture, which were these elongated head people that had red hair, and they were pyramid builders. And some of the famous Nazca lines that you hear about aren't actually Nazca, but they are Paracas, and they were there before the Nazca showed up. The interesting story about the Paracas people is that we know that they're of Eurasian descendants because they've had genetic tests that pretty much confirm this. So that means that somewhere around the Ukrainian Black Sea, that whole area in Eurasia, a long time ago, these people ran for some reason or another, and they knew to go to this specific bay in Peru, which, if you imagine that journey, going all the way across the Indian and the Pacific Ocean, this is a giant journey for, 3,000 years ago. And then they just show up. The Inca recognized them as royalty, and we know that because they mated with the Inca, and some of the elongated skulls have an indicator of what's called an Incan skull, which are these little notches that only the Incan people had on their skull. It's the Inca bones, and we know that the elongated people of the Nazca were basically holocausted by the Nazca. The Paracas people were wiped out. There's mass graves down there with holes in their skulls, and the Nazca didn't know how to replicate the farming techniques, and then eventually their civilization disappeared too. So it's really bizarre that there were all of these wars centered over farming techniques in the past, and I think we might get to see that in the near future.
Wow, you're building it up for the next few years for me here, Ransom. We're going to take a break for a couple minutes. When we come back, also, I'd like to talk about all the seeds that I bought this year. Very, very different. You might know about 20% of the seeds I bought. I wanted something different from the normal, so let's go through a list of solutions as we talked about the problem.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
I wanted to talk about hand-cranked radios for just a second because I think they're incredibly important. I myself, I did hours and hours of research on the best hand-cranked radio that could also be a phone charger, emergency light, to be able to listen to radio stations, the NOAA weather station in case something happened and you were power out, you could still know what the weather was coming. I personally own this one, the Eaton Red Cross FRX3. It's all hand cranked and there's a small solar panel on top of it. So it's multiple options for recharging, including plug-in. So if something were to happen, hand cranking is the next best option. I would love solar, but it might be a cloudy day. You might be inside a house, but you're going to have to create the power somehow. You hand crank it and ergonomically it slides right in like a book on a bookshelf. I can't believe how long the battery charge lasts on this thing. Even if you leave it up somewhere, like I say, on a bookshelf or in a closet for 6 months, it still has almost a full charge after that period of time.
These crank lights and radios are a must-have. The fact is, if you live anywhere where there's going to be weather, you're going to want to know what's going on. You're going to want to be able to see. And not only that, you're going to want to be able to charge your devices so that you can communicate if the power is out. This is something that you should have if you live anywhere where there's tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards, etc. It's not whether or not the power is going to go out, it's just when. You know that's going to happen. So these are something that you should have handy with you in your car, in your backpack. 2 or 3 of them actually would be a good thing to have in several places so that you know that you're going to be able to have light, you're going to have information, and maybe communication. Those are 3 main things that you need. And plus, it's cool. You can listen to the radio, which makes the time go by if you're waiting for anything, waiting for the power to come back on. You're going to want to keep your mind occupied, and you're going to want to be able to see what you're doing and also be able to communicate if there is the ability to communicate, and you don't want your devices to be dead when that happens.
In an emergency, you would know where people were moving to. For example, out here in East Tennessee, we have massive wildfires sometimes, and they'll be on the radio broadcasting exactly where the fires are moving. And this is off of what you consider like your AM, FM channels that you would get on your car radio. Depends on which frequency that they're using for that, but they will absolutely tell you where emergency resources are stationed. So if you have to abandon your car, you could be able to get to another place as long as you know the roads, or you might have a map. You'll be able to get to some help or main roads where there's emergency vehicles transiting up and down there. Have this on the go, that it's be able to put it in your hand and still listen to something. It's very lightweight as well. What happens with your communications, or even listening to something, to be able to understand what's going on in the environment around you? And that's the key to surviving. And Ransom, I know you said this a few times, is understanding your environment, being able to manipulate your environment, and being able to move through that environment to get yourself to safety, to reassess the situation.
Not only that, this is one of the cheapest ways to have insurance, so that whatever happens, if you're on the move, if you have to grab your bag and go, or if you're just at home trapped when the power's out, not only do you know what's going on, but you know if the situation is going to worsen. Imagine all those people that were in several of the different hurricanes that we've had the last couple of years where the power was out. There were a lot of people that didn't know that was coming, and unfortunately they're no longer with us. But I'm sure that people that were prepared and had some radio, they knew where to go, they knew where the relief aid was going to be, they knew which directions the storms were coming, and they knew which directions the water was coming from. So this is a must-have for anybody that wants to know what's going on, and also just having the light.
And you can click on the link in the description box below. And remember, any purchase that you make with the links, whether it be through the podcast in the description box or on the videos across the multiple platforms after we stream, helps us keep this type of information and this show on air, so we can continue to bring information and share this information, so then you can share with others. This is truly how it's going to be, is sharing of information, forming communities, and have others that also have some of the same information, so we can work as a group versus being on your own alone. That's going to make a huge world of difference, sharing information in communities.
If you wanted to start prepping and taking it serious to get some of these very inexpensive tools that are necessities,
why not be prepared for what might happen? Click some of the links, help yourself.
If you appreciate this type of information, click on that link in the description box below. Support our broadcast, our continued mission of bringing you information that can enhance our lives, make our lives more comfortable as we move through this transition.
And welcome back to the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with Ransom, Godwin, and myself. And Free Speech Central right here, Revolution Radio. So as we continue through the second hour, you got to think about the food. What is it about the food? Now, people are going to run to... There's three things I would say that would be assured as we come into the more expensive food, and when the food shortages start to hit, and they tell you they can't plant in certain areas in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Ontario because of this vinyl chloride debacle on the rails there in Ohio. It's going to be a spook event instantly. Whoosh. It'll hit the mainstream media, and it'll be everywhere, and everybody will run for the same exact things at the same exact time. Well, farm tools would be one, anything to grow, gardening, shovels, hoes, rakes, anything like that. Tillers, anything involved in farming to make it, a little easier. Farm implements, anything you could put on the back of like a four-wheeler or something. But people are all going to buy the same seeds also. Oh, and another thing, people are going to run to the co-op and clean it out of fertilizer, like instantly. So, the farm co-ops, the farmers are not going to be stupid. They're going to run and buy anything they can because a lot of them got extra money. It was a pretty good year last year for prices because everything was so expensive. Even though they might not have had as much to offer the market, it was much higher price to get it into the market. There was less actual grain and food going to the market, but the prices were higher, so the farmers got more money. People are going to run for the same seeds. So as we progress to the second hour here, I had a Ransom. I don't know if you'd be into it if I talked about a few seeds, but here we go. Hour two, man. What's your thought? Bring us in. And please remember, Revolution Radio, consider a donation. Keep this on air so we can continue our free speech and our conversations moving forward. Revolution.radio. Ransom, take it. What do you got?
Yeah, well, that's a weird thing. Is a few years ago, I wouldn't have been excited, but I am excited about all the seeds I got. I've been going through them, looking at them. I'm ready to see what spring has to offer. I've been protecting my lime tree all year with these buckets, and it's turned out to be great. Because it lets the sunshine in and it stays at a kind of a nice warm temperature in there. So the thing is actively green, even though we've been dropping down below freezing. And you know how citrus plants don't like that. And, before I get into that, you noticed on that list that all of the nutritious things were hit. Like one of the first things was oranges, which I'm sure is a big portion of the vitamin C consumption for a lot of elderly people and all kinds of people. So when that starts reducing in the food market where people just, they're not buying it, it's not that big a deal, you're going to see a lot of people start getting slowly sicker because their groceries doesn't have the nutrition that it needs. And then you saw the beef and all of the animal fat products, oils to cook, all of that whole list. So I'm going to be concentrating on things that are traditional North American foods again this year. But I found, a lot of problems, like I'm sure everybody does every year when they start new foods, is they don't get it the first couple times for a variety of reasons. Conditions aren't right. It's too much in the sun. It's not enough in the sun. It's overwatered. It's underwatered. It's too hot. Because last year I had to do basically 2 growing seasons of corn because the heat made the corn, start to show its gender, basically. So the stalks were all halfway grown and things like that because it was so hot. So this year I'm going to try to do a lot better timing, and I have a lot of seeds that I've been saving that people have been sending me of different kind of foods. Even last year, I was surprised that I found a new food source quite on accident. I didn't realize it was such a big big thing in Mexico, which was the corn smut mold that grew, or I guess it's fungus. It's not mold exactly. It's fungus that grows on the corn, and it's a whole nother nutritious food source that grows on the crop. So even like if you had several patches of this, you wouldn't necessarily throw it away. You would find out how to cultivate that, or not cultivate it, but process that to make food. They make tacos, all kinds of stuff with it. That's going to be key. And that's kind of why I brought up the Nazca and the Paracas people, because it was all about food technology that made or broke an empire. So when the Nazca moved in, they successfully took over militarily the entire area from the Paracas people. They took their city, they took their water resources, everything. So the Paracas had to run away and go live with the Inca, but the Nazca then tried to start farming. The problem was they didn't know the techniques that the Paracas had, which was they dug these trenches so that it would stay at a certain temperature, 3 feet in the ground, because it's such a dry and arid place. Now, I found something similar here, that the beds that I've been growing here in the Southwest have been giving me okay stuff, like if you're growing tomatoes or things like that love the heat and water. But other things, they just weren't making it. And I found, if I dug little trenches in the dirt and actually put the box beneath the soil level, that it gets down and it holds that water in there. So I think people all over the world are about to have to turn back to traditional technologies to figure out how to feed themselves and go around this government conglomerate of food control that's basically worldwide. And I was just recently reading that in 2023, it's 50, they estimate this year and I think it's a small estimate or a shy estimate of 50 million more people, bringing it to about 400 million people that are starving right now in 2023. And that's like 50 million up from last year. And I have a feeling that this number, which is about the size of the United States population of all the people in it, is going to expand into the billions in the next several years. And that's something that they're leaving out of the headlines. They're making it sound like for people that live in the first world, that you're just going to be, inconvenienced with supply demand issues. And they might not have the stuff at the store, but don't worry, there's all these other food-like stuffs that we're offering at the store that have been packaged already for the last 5 years, probably sitting in a warehouse. And they're going to sell that off slowly while people don't notice that the actual nutritious, fresh food items that are necessities to human life are going to slowly start disappearing. Unlike we talked about before, the butters, the meats, the breads, oils, and fresh fruit that has citrus and things like that. And what happens when the countries start folding to pressure from their own citizens around the world, when they start noticing that there's a reduction in food, which will cause every country in the world probably to internalize their food and start rationing it. And we've already kind of seen that with China and other countries that are already starting to do that.
Yeah, which brings me back to my point here. What we're about to experience is going to be a constriction of almost everything in the way of life that you have expected from another delivery system, meaning that you're going to need to create that yourself, either yourself or with community, with others, neighborhoods, communities, whatever you call it. But that would need to be taken care of by yourself for the predominant, I don't know, I'm going to really say 5 to 7 years, of, it hasn't gotten bad enough to even like delve in. Once we get there, you'll understand what I mean. Like over those last course of the year and a half, talking 6 months about before the fertilizer shortages. So I was talking about this in probably August, September of 2021, that there were going to be massive fertilizer shortages in March of 2022 that would affect all the crop production further down, and we sit where we sit today just based on the fertilizer losses. That's not accounting anything that happened in the Southern Hemisphere and all these things that are about to add on top of that. So if you do that same slow motion thing like you did, you talked about the Russian troop movement where it started like day one, where it sits now, like the map is greatly different. Well, the same thing. You think back, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, what the food price was and the availability and how the world was, way more stable than it is now and way cheaper. We just leave it at that. That's a huge difference. It's the same, but different, but the same, because it's because of the same world and the same protocol plan moving forward. So once it gets to for me at least, once we're there, I'll know we're there, and I could say specifically we're there. Like currently, we are definitely in the beginning, and have way entered many footsteps into this transition: the grand solar minimum onset, the change in the climate, magnetic fields on the sun, magnetic fields on the Earth, affecting now jet streams, cloud cells. You can see it. You can feel the resonance change, how people perceive reality. There's a lot of changes. It's in your face. You can't ignore it anymore. There's something way beyond CO2 is going on now. But understand that and absorb that as a part of information. And don't shake in your boots and be like, oh, no, I can't believe it's like that. Well, it is like that. Okay. That's a great thing to know, because then what comes next? Well, if the breakdown is planned, which I think it is, many could agree, many could disagree. It is what it is. It's the thought. I'm glad I can share it here, Revolution Radio. Let me thank you for that. I'm banned on a platform or two for saying such things. I can't even talk about the Ohio disruption with the fire and everything. It's not allowed on YouTube now. I got to go off channel, like, what we delved into earlier on the program, and like Rumble and a few other places, to even put the information out, because YouTube's like flagging videos for going up talking about that too in depth. It's crazy. We are well into this grand solar minimum change of the electromagnetic field. You already know it. You could feel it. I know it. I could feel it. The same thing when we hit this point where it'll be about 5 to maybe 7 years, 5, 6 years, where you're going to have to replenish the stocks of what you have stored away. You might think you have all these, supplies and things. That's cool, but you're going to need to replenish it for 5 to 7 years with you and your community. After we get to the point where it's finally has collapsed enough or reduced it. I'm not going to say collapsed. I'm going to say reduced itself enough in activity that things really slow down, and you won't get a lot of things. You'll have to take care of that delivery yourself, whether it be whatever. I mean, think about it. Base metals, that's going to be a little difficult. We'll have to rely on something for that. Foods, well, that's something you can take care of. And see, there's a lot of things that are your basic needs and necessities that you yourself can take care of. But since you've grown up for the last 2 generations, that has been relegated to supply chains and supermarkets and the way life was. And you didn't have to do, just more trouble to do it yourself. It took more time. You could just go buy the thing in a supermarket. Now, back when the switcheroo came, they really had to offer quality product, because it was like grandma's homemade thing, and you're trying to sell me something in the supermarket. Grandma will just keep doing it unless it's as good. Right. Like the food was way better when this transition came over. They had to make it equivalent with anything, the best of the best, the creme de la creme from any homemade off the veg or anything produced on the farm. They had to make it equivalent. Well, now it's junk. But anyway, you are going to have to think about food. Now, again, when people run and try to grab everything at the same time, because it'll be announced one day, and once it is, that'll be one of the keys to look for, that the rapid onset of change to flip it over, like literally flip over the apple cart, will be the day that on the public news they come out to say something like, the fields in Ohio cannot be planted this year. The fields in Pennsylvania cannot be planted this year. Or a third, headline you might look for, Amish forced to move from their land because of contamination. The fourth one would be Ontario, Southern Ontario crop grow zones not able to plant on because of contamination from the Ohio fire. Once you start to hear that, forget about the water going down. Like, farmers can't irrigate off the Mississippi River. It's not as scary as saying this whole 2-state area plus up into Canada, this big old giant dot red on the map, you can't plant anything here because it's so toxic. Oh, and by the way, everybody lives there, you got to leave. Like when that hits the news, man, it's game over. It is absolutely game over. So that'll be a huge, huge indicator that something has drastically shifted. At that point, the run for everything I talked about will be on. So why did I try to preface that? Well, if you'll allow me a quick sip here, I need to clear the throat. But I wanted to talk about the seeds that I bought that are not your average seeds, because I already have the average seeds. And I know where I can buy more. Like these farm co-ops that I've been going into, looking for some wine vines to plant out here along the fence, along the driveway. And I've been visiting a couple co-ops, went to Tractor Supply and Rural King and the co-op, the farm co-op. They have so many seeds, like unbelievable amounts of the regular things, but they'll have 20 different types of watermelons or like 15 types of beans, like the seed racks are endless, but it's always the same thing. Beans, squash, tomatoes, carrots, beets, this kind of stuff. Great. Lettuces and these things. Okay, so anything in the United States that you're pretty familiar with as like something you can buy in a supermarket. But let's go to some other things that have way more nutrition that you can grow just as easily, and they might even be more adapted to your area. Where should I even start? Hibiscus. These hibiscus seeds, I got the rose hibiscus and the white hibiscus, because when I've eaten the flowers on these before. Now, for those of you who don't know, hibiscus, you can eat the flower. Now, this is not medical advice. This is just myself, what I have done in the past, where I have traveled, what I have seen myself, in my own experience. This is no way, shape, or form telling anybody to ingest any plant. Do your own research. I'm just telling you my own story. I was traveling in Thailand, and I saw people eating these flowers on, people backpacking through Thailand. In Pai, in the northern Thailand, you got a bunch of people running around eating all the flowers off of the hibiscus bushes. They were eating them off bushes. I didn't know what that was. So all these people picking all these flowers in the morning, eating them, and So I tried a couple of them, and they're like aloe vera. They're very soothing. There was a lady lips type of hibiscus flower. It kind of wrapped in on itself, really, really sweet in the morning. First, like you could get the sugar juice out of it, craziest thing. And then they had the regular, more traditional hibiscus, like either the white or the rose or the white and the red. I like the red one the best because, again, it was like eating aloe vera, but the red variety had way more micronutrients in it. So I'm looking at hibiscus because this is the thing that most people are going to walk by, and they're not even going to know it's a plant. And there's medicinal uses for it for thousands of years across China. So A, pretty flowers. B, it brings in pollinators for me. C, I can eat the flowers anytime I want. And then D, it is also a medicinal, but my favorite one is most people will walk right by it and not even look at it as anything food. And so you want to disguise your foods, right? You want to keep them hidden. So which brings me up to nasturtiums, which is another one. This is a flower that you can eat that'll be growing on the fence. So for most people who don't know what this is, you're going to walk right by it and just think it's flowers growing on a fence, like just a viney thing on a fence. But these different types of nasturtiums, the flowers also packed. It's a superfood in the flower. And when they're really, really tiny, when they're coming up, they're like 1, 2, 3 inches tall. You can eat the leaves off of those. So if you want to, you can keep growing it as a never-ending vine and then harvesting the ends and the tips of the leaves. So maybe you plant 10 of them and they all grow at the same time, and your whole thing is to clip, scissors every day. You're taking off, for every few days you're taking off the tips of those. So you're at least got a big handful of that. But the flowers are really where the gold is because that's where all the micronutrients are. And again, it's not like any kind of medical advice. So let me come to something here. Not a lot of people are thinking about Asian vegetables, but some of these that I've had when I lived in Asia and worked over there, there's some super delicious, really deep, fulfilling, very filling, very healthy vegetables that we just don't normally get here in the States. But if you go out of your way, you can find a few of them. So I want to throw the list of what I got in my pack here for this year that I ordered myself. Tokyo long white bunching onions. Way different than what you consider our scallions or shallots or something like that here. They're much thicker on the stalk, and if you let them grow long enough, you get a nice big old white onion at the bottom there. But it's got a little bit more taste between garlic and onion. It's a little heavier. It's not really a leek. It's in a league of its own of the long white bunching onion. And do they come up ever? They'll get a good 2 feet tall. These. The mustard plant, I got the Misomi mustard, which is type of a Japanese mustard. If you ever had the yellow hot mustard, wasabi will burn your sinuses, the green one. If you ever had the yellow one, any of you lucky enough, that is the Misomi mustard seed that they're using that from. So, again, I'm thinking spices for and medicinals, because that's been used forever as a medicinal as well. And let me see. Oh, the wasabina or wasabina. This is a type of lettuce that is a cross between arugula and wasabi, but very light. It doesn't have that real bite of either one of those. Go figure. I had to buy it because arugula here just grows. You drop the seed, you walk away in 3 weeks, and you can eat. It's really that easy here. We're lucky for that. The purple shiso. I've had this in soups a lot before. It's called Perilia. And anything purple, superfood, you definitely want to have that. It grows fast. You can continue to harvest the leaves. The plant keeps growing. And some people would put a little bit of it, juice it with pomegranate seeds, and then add anything else like the pineapple juice or something after that. I've seen that one in Thailand. They were juicing this along with, you could need one of those juice bars. You can order anything in. But I was wondering what it was. Like, what are those purple leaves? Never saw them before. The Korean mint, which is called Augustache. I'll spell that for everybody out there. Agastache, Augustache. It's the mintiest mint, spearmint, snap and snap flavor you've ever had. You want to try that one if you're a fan of any kind of mint or that sort of mint teas. I'm looking at it also garnishing on dishes. Sometimes you can squeeze a little bit in to taste the flavor on a drink. Have it as something to clean the palate, helps with the digestion. And the taste of this one is super crazy. It's the crispiest. I can't describe the taste really. It's the most. I've had a lot of minty things, peppermint, spearmint, chocolate, mints, and different things like this. I'm talking the plants, not candies. But this one is in a league of its own. It's very light. It's almost air-like, but you have the most densest taste where it hits that one sensory part of the taste bud where a mint plant will be sensed. It rocks that one, but everything else around it is very light in taste. It's almost like biting into the most craziest flavored spearmint or mint you've ever had, but everywhere else is like a cloud in the mouth. I'm trying to describe it. I sound like a madman. But I tell you, if you like any sort of minties, you're going to dig that one for sure. And then the last one here, the turnip. This is called kanamachi. This is Japanese kanamachi, which is a white turnip variety. It doesn't go super, super deep into the ground. It's more of a little roundish. The thing about this is you can keep taking the leaves off. They're as dense as kale with all the goodies that you get from kale for vitamin C and everything else, but they're not nearly as fibrous-y. So if you like kale and you like the benefits of that, cooking, stir fry, or whatever, this one is a very light version of that. It's so much easier to cook, the kanamachi leaves, than it is for anything kale. There's night and day difference, but it's almost exactly the same. Just the density, the thickness, the density of it's way, way light and less than anything kale-ish. So, Ransom, that is my little set of Japanese. I still have, probably another 150 seeds, and I wanted to talk about tobaccos tonight too, but, you're super into the gardening and getting things done, so I just wanted to take a break here and let you throw any ideas you might have had about, or if you knew any of those varieties and you can tell us more about them.
Actually, what's funny is I have that wasabi lettuce growing everywhere. It kind of got out of a little pot. I was growing herbs for a salad or, like a salad spring mix, and I was growing that, and they seeded and they got everywhere. So I have it everywhere here in the middle of the desert in the winter. And I'm not watering those areas where it popped up. It just popped up all over the place. And it is or at least the one I have is very strong. It tastes exactly like if you ate a chunk of the green wasabi, just chewing like a leaf up in your mouth. So you could definitely add some spices. What's really cool about that plant is it seems to just take off. Like you said, it's everywhere around my yard right now. It's growing with the other wild lettuces that I have. I have the kinds, like you can make tingers out of, and it's got the little spikes and stuff on it. All of that stuff is cool, but I was going to mention, if you grow just like one cilantro plant, you were talking about kind of these plants that are edible, you could just leave outside. You really don't have to do anything with them. Cilantro and walking onions are great, because once you put a patch of the walking onions there, they just kind of fall over and they make a new patch, and they keep doing their own thing. And you don't really have to water them. Even here in the desert, you don't have to water them that much. And what's really cool about those is you can eat in the spring when the nice green stalks come up, you can eat those as green onions, and they're real garlicky. Or you can wait till later when it gets hot and they grow these weird bulbs at the end of it. It looks like an alien plant. The onions literally grow on the end of it like a flower. And each one of those are like a garlic bulb, and they're juicy, and you can eat those, and they grow all year. So there's always something there. And even in the wintertime, you can go over there and pull up the bottom, and you'll have a big bulb on the bottom of that. But the cilantro is great because the bees love it. For some reason, I've noticed that they're attracted to that smell for some reason or another. And if people remember, you need to have a flower garden as well as a garden if you really want success with any of your plants. You want the bees up in your yard, up in your garden, hanging out. I know a lot of people get uncomfortable by that, but that's a necessity that you have to think about. That's one of the biggest part of the balance of growing things, is having the right insects in there pollinating everything for you. But if you live in the Southwest and you're really thinking about cheap and efficient ways to have survival foods, you're in luck, because the yucca grows everywhere in the Southwest. And when it blooms, you have several food choices from it. When the stalk first starts growing up, you can cultivate or gather, as many of these as you can when they're probably 9 to 10 inches long. And what you get is a super nutritious, kind of like a, what do you call those? Asparagus spear, but it's really big, and you can collect several of those, and you can eat those as fresh stuff. But also the flower that blooms on it, all of the petals on it are this really buttery onion flavor. And in the Southwest, I'm sure that there were some extremely hard years for Native Americans living in the Four Corners area, where the yucca plant was the only food source they were getting, along with maybe some rabbit. So that's a big free, and think about it. When you look, if you've ever seen video of it, if you don't live in the Southwest, you'll see millions of these plants out there blooming all over the place, which means, millions and millions of pounds of free food that's nutritious. It only comes in the spring. However, you can dry these things. I have been drying cilantro, the leaves, when they come out, and they're the best before they change, and they kind of change flavor before they seed. And you cut them up and you just put them somewhere to dry, and then you can fill up your seasonings with those. And you think about it, this is a really cheap and efficient way to keep vitamins and nutrients coming in from just stuff that you're growing outside that you're not really concentrating on. Because that was my biggest thing when I started gardening, is the minimal effort. Now I'm going to put a lot more effort this year, but it's amazing what you can do with really not doing anything other than dropping seeds off in certain places around where you live, and watching nature kind of, bloom out into all of these free food sources. I'm not really sure about that hibiscus stuff, but I did notice when we were visiting Mexico, my in-laws, every morning they make this big pitcher of purple, I guess it's hibiscus juice. They make a drink out of it, and it's really quite delicious and refreshing. And it's not really a juice or sugary like that. It's got a little bit of tart, but it is kind of sweet. And they seem to be in great health, and they're chugging down a gallon or two of that every morning. They're just sucking it down. It was a new thing for me. It was kind of like a Kool-Aid kind of, or a juice made out of a flower. another thing I was going to point out, I don't know about where you live, is a totally different environment. That's why I like talking to you, because you're over there with lots of rain in the mountainous area. It's basically a rainforest through parts of Tennessee there. And I'm on the other end of it, where we get less than 2 inches of rain maybe in a year. A lot of times. And so we're dependent on municipalities, but there are certain plants that just do their own thing. I talked about the yucca, cilantro, these wasabi lettuces and stuff like that. Believe it or not, all of these hardy lettuces grow really good in the desert if you just provide them with a little amount of shade. All through the winter, you can be getting fresh greens. And those too, you can just cut up the leaves and dry them and make powders out of them. And basically what that is concentrated plant fiber and nutrients. Of course, you're going to lose some because it's not the same as eating it fresh, but it is something that you can store for long periods of time. And then the kales grow great here in the winter. So if you're in the Southwest and some of these mild winter temperatures, like we've been ranging anywhere from like 60 to 70 degrees in the day to 30 and 20 at night, which is a lot different than most of the country right now. And the way it's looking is these winters are going to be colder and colder. So depending on your area, you're going to have to start concentrating on plants that do good where you're at when you have the good conditions throughout the year. That seems to be something that everybody's going to have to relearn. But things like walking onions and these other onions and stuff seem to grow just about in every environment. And that's not something that you're going to be feeding your, the animals, because they'll get sick. They don't eat onions and stuff like that. So that's all food for us. And not to mention, you were bringing up, we've said this for a couple of years, that if you keep growing stuff like this, nobody recognizes it as food. Even having a squash plant out there, if somebody's not familiar with it, they just see these big yellow flowers, and that itself right there is a big food source. If you have enough of them growing, you can not only eat the flowers, but the fruit that's made afterwards. I'm going to try to concentrate on all these things that feed you, but not only feed you, things that are easily jarred, and squash, tomatoes, zucchinis, all of that good stuff. It does only grow in the summer, but those are all the good things that you can put in jars and have ready-made meals, basically, if you can come up with a small meat source or a meat to go with it. You can make spaghetti, zucchini dishes, salsas, all of that stuff, and pack your closet just like Grandma and Grandpa used to do. I remember when I was little, my grandmother had jars of everything everywhere, and she also went to go buy every deal that she thought was a good deal, preparing for a day that never came. Because she grew up in the Depression, because she knew for a fact that day did come and she had to live through it. And I think we're in that spot right now. I mean, every indicator is that we're about to repeat this pattern. And I just wanted to say one more thing before we get back to like food to grow, is that I can kind of show you this little program that's 36 years old, and it's called the Slow Food Movement. And what it is a bunch of countries that got together 36 years ago and started talking about how, I'll just say it like they say it. Basically, they're claiming that in every year since a few places on Earth is untouched by their climate crises, it was evident that farmers from the U.S., Japan, Australia, Uganda, Italy, and everywhere in between talked about how drought, flood, fire, storms, heat waves, plagues, and pests destroyed all their livelihoods. Some swore that they would, preserve their lifestyles, and others wondered if they should even start, or if they should even continue. And then it goes on to talk about how they have a 36-year plan to reduce farming, reduce population, and all this stuff, reduce fossil fuels, so that there will be people giving up farming entirely, because farming is so bad for the planet. Now, think about this idea that was they were pushing around 36 years ago, called the Slow Food Movement. And I ask you, is that not what we're at the end of this plan right now? We're well into the Slow Food Movement, where they're reducing farms. And there will come a day when you can't just go to the store and buy seeds. And you're talking about, you're happy you have all these seeds, and thank God for these groups across the U.S. that are having these seed exchanges where a group of farmers and just different people that are into that go and they trade their seeds and give out free seeds. That is the future. That's the way forward. So think about the idea that you remember when this recent emergency happened in 2020, some of the stores were doing a pilot program to test if they could, tape off areas like seeds as non-essential items. So think about that in the middle of a food crisis, that they would all of a sudden decide that seeds that could get you out of a food crisis are non-essential.
So were the shovels and the other things that you needed to grow your food. Again, you could go to an estate sale, even that the COVID was going on. People were wearing masks at those estate sales, and you could still pick up those items you couldn't find in a store. They were closed. What about all the mom and pop stores that went out of business? Forget them. They wouldn't abide by the digital rationing card policy, soon to be inbound. So what if you do have to continue growing some of your own stuff? See, this is where I keep coming back. What might we be deficient on? So I'm going to talk about tobacco for a second. I'm not a smoker. I'll say that on record. I don't smoke. But tobacco has been used for thousands and thousands and forever of years, along with alcohol in grid downs or whatever. Just society. Think about society 5,000 years ago. They still wanted tobacco and alcohol. Doesn't matter if you have electricity or not. Whatever way of life or whatever's at that time wants both for the last gold, silver, tobacco, and alcohol. 6,000 years, good everywhere, every destination, right? It's pretty much like that. So I taught myself how to distill. A buddy of mine has a license. He does their own distilling here, and they even grow their own contract corn crop here with an original variety to produce some of the best whiskey. And I think they're running 100 acres of corn that they put in through the distillery. I could be wrong. Could be higher, 250, somewhere around there. But he was teaching me a few things, and one of them was how to use fruit. It's any fruit. Like a crabapple tree is great because nobody cares if you pick crab apples. I'm going to say this right now. You can go down the street and you can find an abandoned lot with some apple trees on it. And as soon as you start picking too many of those, people around there, they're like, hey, man, we get apples from here every year. Well, why are you taking so many of them? Nobody cares about crab apples. They're super delicious, by the way. The crab apples are incredibly amazing. Get the brightest red ones and save those and then freeze them. They're super yummy. And you can eat everything with it. You can eat the inside like a regular apple. You got to spit out the seeds. But the little crab apple, if you got the time and you're eating them one by one, just cut off the bottom and the top of it where it attaches the stem or where the bottom of the seed was or the flower was connecting to the fruit. Just cut that off. And then you can eat the thing as like a one pop bite. It's like a seedless grape almost, but different. Take that, run it through a blender, add your sugar as you're heating it up. Then after it cools down, pitch your yeast and hold on and then get there and distill that after like 10 days. Different yeast for different purposes. But once you distill that, then you have those 4 shots that can't be used for anything except for rubbing alcohol. Right? So I'm creating my own medicine by distilling. And if you mix aloe vera with that, then you can get a nice, like real smooth hand gel. We also use it for cleaning. So you're making your own cleaning solution, cleaning solvents. Because those 4 shots, methanol, rubbing alcohol is what it is. So making my own medicine and making my own cleaning fluid for things that just don't normally want to move, but they'll be removed by that, high proof alcohol. You kidding? It's methanol. It's methanol. But as you come down into where you really want to get in the heart of it, you take out the center section. You can use that for tinctures. So then you have your own medium to be able to preserve everything, to take something you would find in the forest that has medicinal value. Could be the root, could be the bark from a stem, could be a flower, not sure, could be anything, inner bark. To put that in alcohol, preserve that, and then put it into droppers after it's extracted its medicinal value out of it in the alcohol. You're making your own tinctures. Right, so that's a skill to understand in itself, is how to take that medicine and make your own alcohol. And then you got a tradable too. People trade alcohol for forever. But what about tobacco? I've never grown tobacco before, but let me run through my tobacco seed. I have a registered farm, so I'm able to get the seeds through the co-op because I have a farm and it's registered, so I'm allowed to grow anything I want. You're not allowed to if you're in a city. I'm sorry, you can't grow tobacco. You need to find it and look at your own state regulation on what you can do with tobaccos. And growing them in a lot of suburban city limits, yeah, you could do a couple, but if you're going to get a bigger patch, they're going to have a problem there. But farms, especially in Tennessee, they grow tobacco here already. So I was looking at different types of tobacco that you might have heard of before. Like the Tennessee variety or Virginia, Burleys, Indian black. What else do we got here? The gold leaf, the black Samson. That's for like pipe tobaccos, cigar rolling tobaccos, cigarette tobaccos. Okay, Virginia, gold leaf, But what I'm focusing on is the sacred tobaccos that have been grown through antiquity for shamans to use. The Aztec Rapa Nui, which has this bright yellow flower on it, and the sacred Wyandotte also. They don't get very tall. Most tobacco plants, they get head high, 6, 7 feet, 6 feet, something like that, 5 feet, 6 feet, 7. But these only grow to like knee high, thigh high, and they're just popping full of yellow flowers. It's almost like some of the cactus that you would see in the desert, just like the most craziest yellow flowers coming out of that thing. To have something like this is, all the stories that you hear about looking back in the past, and Ransom, you know way better than me because you're more out into deeper dives into that than I can find here, let's say. Sorry, I hit the microphone there. But you always hear about medicine men, shamans smoking tobacco when they ingest something else. But our concept of tobacco today is like the cigarette at the store, like the American Spirit. That stuff in comparison only has maybe 3-4% tobacco in it, nicotine in it. Where these sacred plants have sometimes up to 15% nicotine in it. So you can see why. It's a much more concentrated, smaller plant. So I'm going to try these because there's, some First Peoples around here I'd like to give this an offering to. This is something very different, very special. But if you think about the trading and the use of tobaccos through the last, 6,000 years is one thing. But in the modern day, we understand that tobacco can also be turned into an insecticide. So I'm looking at that also as I'm not growing it to smoke it as much. I might keep the prime cuts. Like you're going to distill, let's say you have 8 pint jars and you're going to get a gallon out of 5 gallons. If you're going to, run it through a pot still, probably get 20%. So if you start with 5 gallons, you'll end up with a gallon. If you got 8 pint jars, then every one jar, you should have 8 of those cut into the gallon. So just fill up each one jar and move to the next, and you're finished. And you got a gallon, and you got 8 pint jars. That should be all full. Don't move to the next one until it's full, the prior one, or up to the neck. Right around that 3rd, 4th, 5th jar, that's the sickest one. You're going to pull that one, and you can blend 4 and 6 together to make a nice one. So you get that middle section. You get 4 of those pints out of that. That's the stuff you would want to drink, too, of yourself that you made. So think about the tobaccos. It'd be the same thing. Like, I don't really smoke, but somebody else who does would teach me the ropes on which are the best leaves and which are the nugget products coming off that plant. Keep all that for tradables or whatnot, and then take the other top and bottom, anything that's near the soil level, and then just turn that into the insecticide. So see, I'm trying to get this holistic loop moving through of having both, because they're both so valuable during time. And maybe you could, give me a little knowledge out there about, the Southwest and the use of tobacco in the peace pipes and the pipes.
Well, I'm sure at one time it was a really common thing, judging from the artifacts that are found all over the place, in combination with most likely mushrooms or peyote, and things like that. So they had a whole medicine shelf of things for different purposes. These days, unless they're a traditionalist, not to be mean, but most of the reservations are kind of the modern type American people that are consumers and take their medications and unfortunately it's that. But there is a lot of traditionalists that still believe in the old ways. But basically what you were talking about is a fundamental foundation for barter system. And, obviously if things fell apart, those who had alcohol or tobacco or really any kind of supplies that are useful other than the probably one or two food sources that someone else had, obviously you could set up trade and get things that you don't have. And cannabis is one of those things that you could grow and store and basically make blocks of it and sell it or trade it as medication. And then you go into you were talking about the distilling, manufacturing colloidal silver and things like that. Having the ability to do any of these things would put you far above the average person that's trying to just survive on what's left. The tobacco, just for the simple fact that there are so many people that like tobacco, it would be a guarantee that you would always have a little something special for barter, if everybody's growing their own eggs and tomatoes and stuff, you might not be doing good on something and you could trade it. Like meat seems to be what I see being hard to get in the future. It's really not the little small crops and greens and things that you could cultivate like that. It would be the meat, because you have to have land and you have to maintain and protect the land in order to even have meat. And ironically, I was watching this that video that was talking about an ancient farm in Germany, 10,000 years ago or so, and they were obviously fighting to keep their farm animals. I mean, because most of the bodies were all poked with arrows or bashed with blunt objects, so they were in it all the way. Their animals were part of their family. I mean, you imagine out there trying to bash people up or shoot them because they're still in one of your last goats or one of your last chickens or something like that. There's some pretty negative areas that you could find yourself in. But if you had a system or a community of barter, the guy with the tobacco is going to be the guy a lot of people are going to want to be friendly with. The guy with the alcohol is somebody they might want to be on their side of things. And besides that, we know that that's how America was kind of founded. I mean, you can get into the history of the distillers of the Appalachians. We almost had a second civil war over two families that were doing that over a pig, missing pig. So you could just imagine how things would line up when you no longer have governmental systems, or you do have a governmental system and it's also preying on the civilian people. So I don't know. The smartest avenue of this seems to be, to me, is just the knowledge aspect of everything, knowing plants, knowing animals, knowing when to harvest, knowing when to cultivate, and all of these things are going to set you aside from 99% of the population out there in a scenario. But just think about how fast things have changed for so many people in recent years. We had that hurricane that blew through and flattened Florida. You got the earthquake in Turkey that's killed 20,000 people within a matter of days, totally changed the way that everyone's living there. We had several cold snaps that have gone through and devastated. So people should be getting used to the idea that civilization, at least for you and your area, can change overnight. And it seems like, with this thing that's going on in Ohio, that there are going to be repercussions for decades, not only in the surrounding immediate area, but think about all the way down into the Gulf states and the Gulf of Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, potentially being affected by runoff of things like this. And I mean, we know that they have been for years. Like a lot of people have talked about the fertilizer runoffs. Well, you know, here in the next couple of years, that's going to be something that people are going to be desiring, that they can't get the fertilizer. And what's ironic is that slow food movement was talking about in the article how that they needed to reduce the amounts of fertilizer for farms so that they polluted less and disrupted the climate less, you know, because it is our fault that the planet's the way it is, obviously, or it's somebody's fault. But they want you to think it's you, and they don't want you to prepare because they want you to have this belief, a naive belief, that the system will always be there to take care of you. And it's almost like Flint, Michigan was a good warning or indication or trial run to see what would happen to an entire area if you devastated the water supply and what would happen. And what happened is not that much people paid attention to that, and they should have, because they should have realized how easily it was for a municipal area to be totally cut off back into the Stone Age over something as simple as the water supply being contaminated.
Yeah, you're right. Meat might be a difficult thing to get, because you have to realize most things would be hunted out by then. If it really goes to that, which I hope it doesn't, but if it were to, just simply go back to the stories of the Great Depression in the United States, when there were 5 times less people here, and the woods were hunted completely out. So then you'll have to start thinking of a meat source. I mean, could you exist on rabbit? No, it's super lean. You're going to want something with more fat in it. Again, you know, you start to raise a sheep or goat, and then they become your friends, and, you know, you get attached to them like pets, at least at the small scale we're doing. Maybe if you're running 1,000 head of cattle, you're not going to really care about number 875. But there's only 2 or 3 of them, and you worry about them getting sick and trying to keep them healthy and make sure they got enough food and water, and they're like little babies. And you want to make sure that they have the best environment around, but then you're going to go and eat that? No, it's hard. Maybe you could raise it and trade it to somebody else. And like, you take the live animal, I don't want to see it, I don't know another thing, I just can't. I can't. Please don't serve me dinner at your house with that in it, because that'd be too much, you know? Something like that. Like, once you start raising those animals too, you're not going to want to get rid of them in that fashion. I mean, to get the meat source, it's going to be much more difficult if you're raising your own animals too. You're going to have to protect them, like Ransom was talking about. That's where community comes in. And remember, you know, everybody's got a skill. We've talked about this before. Everybody's got a skill. So what skill can everybody bring? And it doesn't even have to be like one of those quote-unquote planned communities. It's just a group of people who are already in the same neighborhood, basically, that were just there at that time, and they had to click together. Or they decided to click together because it was that time. Either or. We're still here after 12,000 years. The Younger Dryas impact knocked humanity back to 10 million, approximately. Look at that, 10 million sprung back through a huge cooling event, 8.1 K event, dropped global temperatures about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, and again, you know, knocked population back that was just emerging after the Younger Dryas impact. We're still here. Things that have gone on are so many more orders of magnitude above, like 50, 1,000x above what we have seen today, and people have still survived and rolled through it. We will this time also. That's just, how comfortable do you want to be during the transition? Like these little things we talked about tonight, thinking about how to implement those in the world around you, because these systems are starting to constrict. And it's just a matter of time before you're going to be reliant on yourself. But if you're already there, when that arrives, that'll be normal for you. people will ask for help and guidance in this thing, and then that's where the skills trading comes in. So I don't know. Ransom, I forgot. I found one more type of sacred tobacco here. Sacred corn planter tobacco. And you got to think how much the ancients were always viewing the heavens and like, what's up there now? That they could see as a debris stream coming in or energetic changes that we're also seeing, but we're not seeing it because we were never told to look for it. And because back then, teachings through every night looking at the stars would be very different than today's stay inside and watch TV world. And Ransom Godwin, thank you for joining me tonight. I rambled till the end. David DuByne signing off, but thank you all for spending your valuable time with us tonight. Any thoughts, ideas? Put them in the comment. Let's talk. Let's share. Until next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolution